It's Common Sense Ohio, our first podcast episode of the summer of 2024. It's officially summer. Yes. Brett here with Norm, a couple of guests from the Buckeye Institute, and I'll let Norm take care of introducing them as well as we get into it. But first, we want to mention our sponsor, Harbor Plus CPA. We're walking into the second half of the year, and if you don't have this kind of relationship with your CPA, shame on you, because you should be able to look at the remainder of the year and know exactly where you're going with your business for taxes. Should be sitting down, taking a look and going, yep, I owe this, I owe this, I owe this. Oh, yeah, I'm going to make a little bit more money here. Okay, we'll adjust here, we'll adjust here. And you're walking in the remainder of the year looking fine. At least there won't be any surprises at the end of the year that you're owing an additional 10 grand here and an additional 5 here because of this, or 25,000 because of this. You're pretty much on track. And that's what Harper Plus CPA does for you. Sits down and quarterly, monthly, whatever you want to do, depends on how you want to work with them. You're on track. So if you're not running your business that way, why aren't you? It's just common sense, right? Anyway, Harper Plus CPA, we got that link in the show notes for you to follow to get more information about them. So, Norm, we got 2 topics today, and we've got 2 experts to talk about those things. But you wanted to recap a little bit from last week's show.
Yeah, so I wasn't here last week. I posted a couple of reels of comments, and Dan, of course, the entire podcast. And there was some discussion on our show about reparations, slavery reparations, and land that had been promised, but in the end not given to free blacks, and some Ohio legislation to address that, and the general topic. And I know, what Brett meant. And it's a common expression that people use when they talk about history, and they weren't there. Obviously, none of us were there in the 1860s. Nobody at this table, nobody in the podcast. And Brett mentioned, what we were like. And I know what he meant by that. He didn't mean us personally. But I thought it would be good to just address, because, the podcast did mention that there were racists, there were copperheads, there were peace Democrats, they were called, and Abraham Lincoln actually banished one of them to Canada. So there's a little bit of history about Ohio that I just thought I'd touch on. Take 1 minute. 60% of Ohio males between 18 and 45 served in the Union Army or the Navy. 320,000 Ohioans, all told, served during the Civil War, including 5,100 free blacks. Many of those free blacks came through the Underground Railroad, which was particularly active in Cincinnati, being a river town. Even though Kentucky was not in the Confederacy, it leaned that way. Ohio had 35,475 approximate casualties in the Civil War, 19,000 killed out of the 620,000 total Union killed, 100 medals of honor awarded to Ohioans. And obviously the GOP back then, they weren't talking about balancing the budget or any of that. They weren't talking about illegal immigration. Back in 1860, in the election of 1864, the top issue was abolition. I mean, that's why the GOP was formed, and Abraham Lincoln, of course, won both of those elections. Went for the abolition ticket by 52.3% in that first election and 56.4%. And Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, that was published in Cleveland and in Cincinnati in the second edition after it initially came out in Boston. So I just want to mention some of those things because while we can talk about there are racists today, and there were racists back then, and racists of all different colors, by the way, Ohio largely was on the side of the angels, and Ohio in general was a positive force for humanity and emancipation of the slaves. And I wanted to get that on record, and if I went on a bit, but I just think the context is important. And I'm not in any way critiquing how you phrase that. I know what you meant.
Right.
When you
right.
look back at history, you meant like what we were like. You didn't mean the immediate people in this room.
Correct.
So
correct. No. Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So our guest today, first off, is Greg Lawson, who's here in studio with the Buckeye Institute, an organization I have a little bit of history with. And then and Greg is a policy specialist for the Institute. And we have Dave Tryon phoning in from Cleveland, who is one of Buckeye Institute's top litigators, an attorney, and has been with the Institute, I believe, a little bit more than 2 years now. And we have Greg in specifically to talk about the Ohio Ed Choice program. And then when we get to Dave's specialty, some of the litigation, particularly involving the Second Amendment and some amicus briefs that the Institute has filed in several important Supreme Court cases, both older ones and current ones. So without further ado, we have had, Greg, no success, despite many requests, to have somebody in from officialdom. And actually, I think it's better that you're here to explain Ed Choice because you don't have any turf to defend. You can just explain it. I think what would be useful for our audience in particular, because this is all brand new, the idea that you have portability of your tax dollars to go and shop for the best education that you feel is out there for your child is something that conservatives and free marketers like Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman, they have, like this has been like a 60, 70 year thing. And we stuck our toe in the water. Senator Cooper Snyder a few decades ago got that because he couldn't get it statewide. He got that program, experimental program for disadvantaged families in Cleveland, Ohio. And of course, there was a program until Obama killed it in Washington, D.C. for school choice. So if we could just let you go here and give us the big picture, what the program is, how it works for a family.
Sure. Well, first of all, Ohio, I think this is the idea of school choice. You mentioned Thomas Sowell. We talked a little bit before we went on there about Milton Friedman and the ability of leveraging. You're putting money into the system. You're paying taxes. And this is allowing you to get a portion of that back so that you can make a choice for your own child. Vouchers in Ohio, they started with the Cleveland scholarship program. That was the first program. And ultimately, it was the program that led even to the U.S. Supreme Court case. And Dave actually was involved in that case back when that was going on, that found that vouchers were constitutional. And so we've always been I think a frontline state. Ohio has been for school choice. It started off as a program that was really recognizing, hey, we've got a bunch of inner city students that are really struggling here, in Cleveland in particular, and we've got to do something to rescue them from an education status quo system that simply wasn't working to meet the needs of those children. After really the success of the Cleveland program, things started to expand. We have a number of other voucher or scholarship programs besides Ed Choice. There's a special needs. There's an autism scholarship. There's one called the John Peterson Scholarship that deals with other special needs outside of the just the spectrum issues that some students have. Then there was obviously Ed Choice, which started off as a program where you had to be in a public school building that was underperforming according to state tests. So if you were essentially, for lack of a better way of saying it, kind of a quote unquote failing school, really underperforming, you'd be able to be eligible. Now, okay. and that was how Ed Choice was for many years. So that came about in the mid 2000s. Actually, Lieutenant Governor Husted was the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives when the Ed Choice program was created. And then it got expanded under Governor Kasich to include an income one so that it wasn't where you had to just be within a quote-unquote failing district by the academic standards, But if you were a low-income student, I think it was like up to 125% or something of what they call the federal poverty guidelines, you'd also be eligible. And I think that was actually really important because a lot of times public schools would sort of mess around with how they do testing. And sometimes students would get disenrolled before they take the test. And so that would sort of artificially heighten the test and scores in such a way that they would be taken kind of off the list for being eligible for the Ed Choice program. Wow. And that was pretty common. Columbus was pretty guilty of that. There was a big scandal about a decade ago with testing and people being removed and what they were doing in terms of what they were reporting to the state. And frankly, a big chunk of the reason they were doing things like that was they wanted to avoid having students being able to avail themselves of these programs. They wanted to literally deny families and students a better education option for them. And frankly, I think that was unconscionable. And there's a lot of things I think the public school district system is doing that's unconscionable. We'll talk probably about some litigation here in a minute on that. But then I think what's happened is people realized this was a big deal. And then we had the COVID closures. We had, and we could go on and on about how I think disastrous that was as a policy decision for students. You see it in the testing scores. There was just testing scores that showed Ohio, and it's not just Ohio, pretty much everywhere is suffering in terms of declines in reading and math scores, but it was dramatic.
Greg, if I can just ask, was DeWine's program on education during COVID, was the decision to shut down and for how long left up to each school board? He did not have a top-down mandate one way or the other?
I believe initially it was, and then there was an opening to it, and some of the districts, particularly public school districts, tended to be very resistant. To be somewhat fair to the DeWine administration, they tried to open up sooner than a lot of states did, and actually there was a lot of the teachers unions and school districts that actually pushed back pretty hard to try to keep them closed.
Okay.
And so
we're all so I didn't have kids then. Mm-hmm. Wasn't really tuned into all of the educational policies. Were all of Ohio's public school systems then they were shut down?
They were pretty much shut down physically, and now they obviously tried to do online sort of things and stuff like that. I mean, my kids for months, especially at the end of the school year when COVID hit, they were totally shut down. They were on virtual through, and then they started doing some things where they tried to open up in the fall, and this is where you started to see DeWine tried to open them up for the fall for that next school year, 21, I guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he had, and I'll give him some credit for this. He kind of fought and publicly sort of browbeat, frankly, some of the school districts who were, I think, kind of embarrassing themselves and really throwing monkey wrenches into the lives of all kinds of families. But I'll say that even when all those schools were closed, we had all the virtual thing that was going on, which works for some students, does not work for many, and was definitely, I think, a problem. And again, the testing scores that we see nationally are reflective of the fact that there is a major gap in performance, really, I think, very directly attributable to these kind of decisions.
Wow.
But private schools typically did not close down.
Did not close.
And so a lot of students that were able to have availed themselves of the program, the Ed Choice program as it existed, or one of those other voucher programs that I was mentioning, they were able to take advantage of it, and they were able to have less decline. And there's been some academic studies that have indicated that a lot of private schools, not exclusively like religious schools, although I'd say that the majority of private schools probably have some religious affiliation, but not necessarily. Yeah. They don't have to.
Like charter schools, for
correct.
Example, that are not religiously affiliated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, what I think policymakers and legislators started to realize is, man, this was something that was a real safety boat, for a lot of these families and a lot of these students.
Well, and I guess naturally, public school parents, noting that the private schools are largely open, maybe that helped drive this voucher idea because they're looking, hey, those people are open. I would like to get my kid in those schools rather than have them sitting here at home.
Absolutely. I think it was a major driving factor. That, and I think there was also, on the students that were on Zoom, some families started to see some of the things that maybe were in some of the classrooms that they were unaware of, and this has obviously led to some of the debates about, well, what are they really teaching in some of the public schools? Right. And that's a bit of a separate issue. We don't have to go down that particular rabbit hole, but I think that also was another element that probably influenced the decision of many households, not all, that chose to do school choice, but some.
That's a good point.
And I think legislators said this is the time to do something big and bold. And so in the last budget that was passed last year, they essentially made ed choice functionally universal. So if you have students in Ohio, you are probably eligible to be able to obtain this scholarship. They call it a voucher. It's technically called a scholarship program, but functionally a voucher. Now, so Ed Choice is now eligible to any family. You get a full amount. There's a dollar amount that's assigned. It's I better double check and be sure. I know it's over $6,000 for K through 12. I'm sorry, K through 8. It's a little over $6,000.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it is 6,000. I can't see it right here. I literally had it pulled up just a minute ago, and I can't quite find it. It's a little over $6,000, and then it's over $8,000 for high school.
Okay.
And then they've actually basically they indexed it for inflation, which is actually really important these days with inflation at the level that inflation is, so that each school year you don't lose purchasing power for the amount of the voucher.
And I assume these numbers represent some sort of per pupil spending that the state does for public school students.
They're very much patterned after, and school funding is very complicated, but there's a base level of funding that every student is supposed to be guaranteed.
Yes.
And so essentially these vouchers try to approximate what that base level is. Now, to be clear, that is not the full amount of an average public school student. That is actually far below.
Sure.
Because when you think about the total cost to a student, you aren't just looking at the state portion, you got to look at the local portion.
Big time.
And these programs, Ed Choice is not at all funded. Not $1 of local property tax dollars goes into this program.
Local education income tax.
That's right. For
dollars.
those school districts, which, by the way, the state of Ohio,
it's like a third of them or something.
It is, and we're the only state that allows local option income tax at the school district level. That's worth a whole show on property taxes.
No
Let
kidding.
me tell, and income tax and local taxes.
No question.
But now to clarify, so if you're up to 400% of the poverty guidelines, so this would be for like a family of four that has like two kids, it'd be about 100, not quite, but close to $125,000 of total income in the house.
Okay.
You would be able to get that full dollar amount of the Ed Choice.
Okay.
Beyond the 6 or the 8. I mean, or you're talking
that's the full amount. You get that full amount.
Okay, gotcha.
So now, if you go above 400% in the household income, you then get there's a formula that sort of does a gradual slope down.
Okay.
So you essentially get less. So the higher the income you have, the less you get of the voucher.
With the thought being a higher income family can disgorge of its own savings and earnings. Part of the money to send your kid to a private school.
And now everybody still gets one. So even if you, top out at, whatever the income level we are, you can't get less than 10%. Now, 10%, 600 to 100. But again, we're talking about, pretty high level and high income folks. So that's how the program is. And you can go to the Department of Education and Workforce now is what it's called now. They've just changed that in the last budget. It used to be just the Department of Education, and they have now tried to refocus the department to not just include education, but to tie education and the development of the workforce.
So it's called Department of Education and Workforce?
That's right.
Okay.
That is now the official title for the department. Wow. And that again was done in the last budget that was signed by the Governor DeWine literally about a year ago, July 1, I guess, of last year is when he signed it.
Interesting acronym.
DEW. Don't call. My understanding is the governor does not want you to call it do. I've heard that. So I used to say, do. It almost sounds like a drink or something like that. I'm going to go and get me an do. They don't like that.
Or do, which is an entirely different substance.
But DEW.
Yeah.
But the family can apply. You do have to submit income information to validate what the amount is and stuff.
Yeah.
And the key thing is once you're eligible, there's lists of schools that you can take that voucher to. Now, not every private school participates. There are private schools that, for a variety of different reasons, may choose not to. Now, many do, and there's a list on the Department of Education and Workforce. What a mouthful. Website where you can go look at the list.
Let me ask you this, because there are some incredible public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm from Cincinnati. Walnut Hills is famous for being an incredible public school district. Upper Arlington, I would say, in Columbus. there are some excellent public school districts. Can you take this voucher and shop to them?
No.
You
So that is something
that's a little painful.
Well, I'll tell
you,
that
was possible.
In the broad scope of things, that's what the Buckeye Institute wants to see happen over time.
Full marketplace.
Full market, money following the student. You've maybe heard the phrase backpack bill at the legislature.
Yeah.
And that's really what you'd want to see in the long run. This is, in a lot of ways, I think this program, Ed Choice, is doing an incredible job. We have really expanded things. I think legislative leadership, in fact, I'll tell you the truth, I think our state Senate president, Matt Huffman, has been a huge advocate of this, and he's one of the major driving forces of this.
Ultimately, you'd like a student maybe who's residing in a really tough school district that's just not hitting its numbers, and they want to maybe go to New Albany schools or
Olentangy, which is growing like crazy up in Delaware County. I'll tell you,
or Southwestern schools.
Oh yeah, it's doing great.
Some schools that really have a great track record for graduating and SATs and all that stuff. So anyway,
that is a long-term policy goal.
Okay.
That gets a little more complicated because this gets to where you sort of have this the dynamics of how Ohio does school funding is the state and local.
Yeah.
And if you look at total funding for like K-12 education, it's close to 50-50. 50% of the aggregate spending is probably state, give or take a percentage or two. It used to be below that. There was some litigation on constitutionality of school funding in Ohio. Ultimately, Ohio started spending more. My understanding recently is with property values going up, that's actually allowed some districts to capture more local tax revenue. So now local revenues probably are slightly ahead.
So, Greg,
in total.
Little sidebar, I just want to know if this is still in effect. So one of the things that marketplace advocates were trying, since they couldn't get vouchers, one of the things they put in state law was if the two adjacent school districts agreed for reciprocity reasons, that if, let's say I'm in Westerville schools and I abut New Albany schools, if the two school boards agree to have reciprocity, students from one district could go to the other district. Is that still?
It is. And actually, this is an interesting thing, and it's something we're going to be working on with hopefully a number of coalition partners next General Assembly.
Okay.
That's called open enrollment. So that's public school district open enrollment. And up until this recent expansion of Ed Choice with the vouchers, open enrollment was actually, if you think about it, the biggest school choice program in the state.
Yes,
something like 80-something thousand
That's
kids,
where I was going with that. Yeah.
Now, there's a problem here.
Okay.
It's permissive, which means you can do that. Now, so something like about 70% of, we have about 610 or so school districts in the state of Ohio. About 70% of them allow some form of open enrollment.
If you count the county boards, it's closer to 800.
Well, you have no idea how many government entities we have. It's
that's
terrible.
all,
But so you can choose to have it on the contiguous school districts, which is what you were talking about.
Right.
Now, in theory, there's quite a few that actually is kind of universal, which means they will take students. Now, realistically, you're not going to jump like 2 or 3 school districts. Transportation-wise, that's not real practical.
Yeah.
But in theory, if you really like the school district that's around 270 and you wanted to go there, you could if you wanted to. Idea.
Maybe one of the parents commutes there, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
However, here is the thing, and I think it's really an interesting challenge, and frankly, it's I think one of the biggest civil rights challenges we face right now. Because it's permissive, a school board can choose not to do this and to not allow anybody in.
That was my understanding.
And so invariably, of those 30% of districts that do not do any of the open enrollment, they're almost all suburbs of the major cities.
Okay.
So when you look at a map of Ohio, and if you have a map of all the school districts, you'll see, and there's a group called the Fordham Institute that has this. If you Google it, you can find this map.
Okay.
And it's really pretty dramatic. It's essentially donut holes around the urban areas.
I can see
so
that.
I live in Westerville. Westerville does not allow any open enrollment at all. We would like to see, frankly, open enrollment become mandatory with some caveats, meaning, hey, if you literally are jam-packed and you've got kids up the gills.
You don't have space.
Yeah, we don't.
That's a different issue.
They're not going to force you to build new buildings.
Bingo.
I mean, that
makes sense.
It's a hardship for the community.
Correct. And that would not be
in that vein.
Right. That would, I think, that would not be correct. That would not be fair. That said, there's a lot of school districts that are declining in enrollment. I mean, we have public school districts are declining. Some of it's because students are going to public charter schools, which are outside the districts. Some of it's because of now, especially with the voucher program and Ed Choice. Frankly, we have demographic issues. People are just having less kids, so there's less kids, generally speaking, just doing any enrollment. But if you have a declining enrollment, you should want to be able to bring kids in. Now, there's some tweaking we have to do to the school funding formula. There were some changes recently made that created some issues there. But conceptually, that's what we should be doing.
Okay.
And I think that these suburban school districts that say no, I mean, again, if they don't have space, again, you don't force them to. But if you have room, then you should at least be able to have a lottery system for students to be able to get in from
Well,
other
especially
areas.
if they walk in with their briefcase of voucher money.
Yeah.
If it covers approximately the cost of educating that student, I don't see a downside.
And I think it's super important, and that is where we get to the complete fairness. Because again, I think what's so brilliant about the voucher program, which again in the long run we want to see this be full money following the student in a way, and actually in the long run, vouchers, as great as they are, they're for tuition, right? Conceptually, there's other policies that other states are doing that Ohio does not do yet. Now, I've written about this, is called education savings accounts. And this is something that's even broader and brings even more market-based stuff, pressure to bear, because in this case, you could use it for tuition purposes, but you could also use it for other things now it has to be bona fide education expenses, but it could be things like tutoring. It could be things like a computer for the purposes of being able to do legitimate schoolwork.
Athletic fees?
Potentially. You'd have
For the school.
It depends on how you structure it. Some states, I think, do allow that. Not all do. Sometimes it's
musical instruments?
That would be, yes.
Yeah,
So things that are, again, directly related. I think that then brings some additional
if you
power.
want to play the tuba in the high school.
Those aren't cheap.
Those aren't cheap.
They're not cheap.
Right. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So in theory, you'd want to be able to do exactly. That would definitely be that.
So, Greg, let's pivot into... so we can breathe Dave in.
Well, let me ask a couple questions.
Go ahead, Brett. Please.
Well, and I'm probably going to play the other side of the fence here a little bit, just because.
Go ahead, man.
You had mentioned earlier, I think this was off mic before we recorded, about organization. There is a coalition, Vouchers Hurt Ohio. Okay, so I'm seeing, and it's got the list of schools here, and one in particular sticks out because that's where I went to school, Mercer County.
Okay.
Bleeds red, Republican. There are no private schools other than one Catholic IC school in that county, but Salina City schools are against vouchers. Why would they be? Because the kids are not leaving.
Well, and I think this is I think
there are no kids are leaving.
Well, I think it's even worse. I think it's really just, I think it's wrong. I think there's a solidarity issue. You've got a lot of the big school districts.
Okay.
I think there's teacher unions that are driving this. The argument that the school districts are making right now, and it's actually the people who are leading this charge are the same people who sued over the constitutionality of the state of Ohio's entire school funding system back in the 90s.
Okay.
They're really spearheading this. Their argument, and I think it's a bad argument, but the argument that they're making is...
That's a Perry local case.
Yeah, that was the DeRoff case. And so actually the leader of the organization that sued for that is leading this, the vouchers.
Bill Phillips?
It is. It's literally Bill Phillips,
Okay.
yeah. And so he's the guy who's spearheading this.
Okay.
And,
Who we should say, Bill Phillips was at one time the acting superintendent of public schools in Ohio.
Gotcha. Okay.
So he was a very high-ranking. In fact, I had a good working relationship with him on privatization of school busing.
You mentioned that a while back.
Bill equalized the funding formula so that a school district would get the same amount per pupil whether they contracted out or ran it in-house.
Gotcha.
And that gave the school boards at each school district the opportunity to fairly assess which way to go. But that's a side thing.
Well,
but Bill Phillips he led that.
He's a very zealous defender of public schools.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, if you read his emails and stuff, he's a true believer.
Yes.
I sometimes think that it's a little bit, I think he may have a somewhat antiquated view of how public schools are operating in this day and age and how they're doing things today. And I think doesn't really appreciate the importance of how school choice is not just something for wealthy families. This is something that for all families. Now, do wealthy families sometimes take advantage of it, especially as we universalize it? Sure, but this is something where it's open, and we are going to continue to push to make sure that everybody is aware, frankly, of the program. But they're suing because essentially their argument is because you're spending money on the vouchers, you're not spending enough money in the public education system overall. Thus, you are not essentially complying with the state of Ohio constitutional mandate, just like the Droff case, of being a quote unquote, I believe the phrase exactly that's hung up is a thorough and efficient system of public schools or common schools, I think is the phrase.
That decision, is it mostly looked at as conservative or liberal?
The Droff cases?
Yeah.
I would probably say more liberal because the argument was...
It still doesn't follow why that's a lot of city schools would want to be on vouchers.
And here's the problem.
I'm trying to connect the dots.
They're saying they're saying it's taking money away. Now, here's the problem, right? There was several decisions in Droff, several state Supreme Court decisions.
And follow-up settlement agreement, all kinds of stuff. But I would say, I'm going to temper Greg a little bit, because I was very active as a lobbyist during that period. And I would say that a fair number of Republicans thought that the funding formula was,
and I know that's a broad stroke statement.
It was messed
I should have
up.
said that
Because what you would have, like up around Toledo, where that nuclear power plant is, that school district got to buy school buses almost every year, brand new. I mean, they were swamped in money. Right. Yeah. And a farm school district, maybe like adjacent to that district, would be one of the poorest districts in Ohio. Yeah. And people are saying it's kind of random. Like if a big taxpayer happens to be in your district, those children get this deluxe education, whereas the public school kids in a poor rural district like in Appalachia, which is where this case came from that Greg's talking, coal mines that are closed up and stuff, like nobody has jobs. They're raising marijuana to have a cash crop, very destitute kind of situations down there. And so a lot of Republicans felt that something was wrong too.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
But
gotcha.
I don't want to disagree with Greg, but I just wanted to augment.
I just need some clarity because in regards to it just seemed very glaring. Going, wait a minute.
Yes.
Well, this very conservative area is for vouchers for Ohio, and I wasn't putting the dots together.
And to be clear, after Droff, the state spent a lot more money. So
they
spent a lot more money, and they essentially do what they try to do is to offset what you were just describing, which is the state spends more per student in the districts with a low property tax base. So if you have a high property tax base, you might only get $1,000 per kid from the state, and the rest is local. Yeah. Now, if you have that problem where you're the farm district and more destitute, the state might be spending a lot more of that. They'll be spending $7,000, $8,000 per
to make up for it.
Correct.
Sure,
and that's the result of Droff.
Gotcha.
Now, technically, in the last case, the last decision that the state Supreme Court said, they said it was still unconstitutional, but and then they relinquished actually jurisdiction of the case. Yeah. So that was, I think, in 2003 or 2004. So about 20 years. So there's this outstanding thing where it's technically unconstitutional because nobody's ever relitigated it again, but yet there's been a lot of changes in the school funding. The other thing they did is they created an entire facilities commission where the state actually comes in far more, because that was one of the things too, was we had crappy buildings and decrepit buildings,
asbestos, blah blah,
and we need to fix that. So the state has an entire funding system now through the facilities commission where they can fix that. But here's what I think has happened. So is it constitutional? Well, that's in the eye of the beholder. Lawyers can probably do that, but they've never brought litigation again since then on that question. Yeah. But now what they're doing is, because of voucher, and this is where the public school districts get very upset, is they're essentially saying that now you're diverting money that should be going to us. Okay. Thus, we're not getting our kind of fair share, and you're creating inequities in thorough and efficient common school system that the Constitution supposedly.
Although in that same budget, Brett, we discussed this on the show, in that same budget, they actually, for the public schools, gave them a raise, and it was separate from this voucher program. Like it was a separate line item. So really that claim is false.
Yeah. Well, actually, essentially, technically, there was a while where that happened, but actually the vouchers and charter school funding come out of the overarching school funding formula.
But they jacked it up enough to compensate.
They did. And so, and I think here's the general thing you'd have to look at is, the state is still spending way more money in the public school system We have declining enrollments now too, which has to be factored in, and we have a system where we tend to guarantee certain school districts. So even if you're losing students, we don't necessarily, it takes a while for that to matriculate its way through the system. So you may be being overcompensated for a while as you decline in enrollment. And so I think we have to be very careful about all that. But the thing that bothers me about what these folks are saying is a couple points. First of all, they want to declare it unconstitutional. And if they were successful in declaring something like Ed Choice unconstitutional, in theory, what that would mean is every single student, I think we got 60 or 70, I forget the exact enrollment numbers. I should have looked that up. But all these students would immediately have to essentially go back into the public school district that they left for whatever reason that they might have left, whatever choices the family made.
Which is a monopoly. It's a monopoly.
Yeah.
It would be like saying you can only shop at a certain grocery store chain. Like Ohioans, you can't go to Giant Eagle. You got to go to Kroger or some kind of crazy.
Well, if only that old Lawson store used to do it. Since my name's Greg Lawson, I would have appreciated that. They might have stayed in business a little longer. A little captive audience here. We're all free. No, I'm joking.
Well, and I don't want to not go to the Second Amendment. I want to give time to this though too. But I guess, and I've said this on the podcast before. The voucher system, obviously it works for some and it doesn't for others, and there's a pros and cons for everything. But to me, it looks as though we have a cut on our arm, but we're band-aiding our leg, putting bandages on our leg. Teachers are doing the best that they can in the scenarios that they're put in. My wife teaches future English educators at Wright State University. I know a lot of those teachers, over the last 20 years.
Is that a teacher's college?
No, Wright State University.
Okay. Within the university?
Yeah.
Is it a teacher's?
They're teaching teachers, they're getting the whole gamut, that sort of thing. Graduate school, the whole 9 yards.
Gotcha.
It seems to me, it looks as though, you've got schools that are doing the best that they can. And again, there's waste everywhere, that sort of thing. But how do I want to say this? It seems as though we're not addressing the situation that the students are also trying to do the best that they can, but they don't have the home lifestyle to be, or the culture to be the best student that they can. These teachers are working against home life, that they can't even do homework, and they got to bring homework back in. They're spending half the time doing homework that should be done outside. And I know elected representatives don't want to go back and say to the constituents, you're bad. It's a terrible home situation. Give the teachers a break. Mm-hmm. Again, broad stroke. I get it, because there are a lot of bad schools because administrations are way too fat, way too fat and way too heavy. Yeah. But I don't know. I see these teachers struggling to do the best that they can in the situations that they bring in, but the home life is horrible, and they can't fight it. Yeah. They can only do the best that they can. Where I think we grew up in a different age and different scenario. I really do.
Brett, I understand. I mean, there are metal detectors at public school entrances.
Exactly.
Because kids are bringing guns because they think it makes them a man.
Right.
To bring a gun.
It's a totally different scenario. That's like, I can't even imagine teaching in that type of school.
I understand. But here's the thing. Should the student, be compelled to go to a nightmare school, the voucher allows the parents, even if it's not a great parent.
No, I get it.
It allows a parent to say, hey, I'm working 3 jobs, scrubbing floors, tending bar, whatever I'm doing. Right. I want my little Johnny or little Sally to go to.
And I guess that leads to and I'll ask one more question about this. What is the end run for voucher then? What's the end run? Is it to break public schools and close them up? Because to me, it looks as though
you only have one childhood.
I understand. I understand.
And so it's to allow the parents to optimize their options.
Right. So is there an end run for voucher?
Well, I think the end run of school choice, and if we got to the full system that we'd like to see, like from the Buckeye Institute, with the education savings account that I was talking about before, what you'd be seeing in theory, and this is right now, look, pie in the sky now, it certainly is. So it's not going to happen tomorrow. But I always say, look, we customize our entertainment options. We have Roku. We can get HBO and ESPN. We can package them if we want to. We can do them individually.
We have choice for everything else.
And I know education is different. It's obviously fundamental and foundational. But why can't we piece together a thing where if you had this money, you could go and do the computer science class. If maybe you have to Zoom it, or maybe you go down to the community college and you do that so you can do some coding and computer science.
Yeah.
And then you take several of your like English classes at the school that you're zip coded into because of where you happen to live. Okay. And then you could go and maybe hire a tutor for something that you may.
So you're looking at a different model then,
I think we're looking
public school.
I think in the long run, where public schools would eventually be a vendor and a provider of services, but what we're doing is we're actually funding the students. I think the question that we have is, it's not so much that we want to it's not about shutting down public schools. It's about saying, how do we fund the education options of the family? Yeah. So we do this. And interestingly enough, a lot of other countries,
it puts the focus back on the consumer.
Sure. No. Yeah.
And Brett, let me just say, and then we will get Dave in.
Exactly.
But let me just say also that if Milton Friedman, rest in peace, if he was here, he would also say to you, okay, a district that maybe is too heavy on administrative staff, and a district that sees students walk out the door with their vouchers
would improve.
Will say to
They're
itself,
gonna look inwards.
"Well, we're going to go out of business here unless we improve as a district." And so
you would hope because they don't have a business mindset there.
Well, they will.
They will. It'll start to turn.
When you're in a market,
it can start to turn.
When those school teachers and the administrators are in a survival mode, like our district is going to go out of business unless we really polish up our act, even though there are unfair socioeconomic issues that you're talking about, which I totally agree with, but I don't want to make the student, Milton would say, the student cannot, he cannot or she cannot be the victim of a system like that. They only have one child.
Right. And I agree. I mean, it's a mixed bag of that whole thing.
And the students are not there for the benefit of teachers and administrators. They're there to get an education.
True. Exactly. So, I agree with that.
So I'm not smashing your point. No, the socioeconomic problem.
It's a tough situation.
It's totally real.
Yeah, it is.
It's totally real.
And I think that's right. And I think one of the great challenges is, we're huge advocates of school choice. We want to see it, obviously. But look, you got to have families that are able to be engaged, understand it. We got to also make it somewhat simple. I mean, the one thing, I love the market. We represent that. The one thing we've got to be careful of is, as you expand that, you have to be able to also educate people, the families, about what the options are. Because, freedom can be, freedom is a great thing, but freedom's a little bit of a burden in the sense that you have to now make choices.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And when you have to make choices, you have to understand things, do your homework, have the ability to do it.
Kind of get you back involved with education to a certain degree.
So, Brett, I'll tell you what, when I was in Cincinnati going to high school, I went to St. X High, which is a Catholic Jesuit high school, right? Okay. My parents spent some pretty good money to do that, and I had to help pay it back by working for my dad, and went back to his bills. But the point is, if I had the choice to go to Walnut Hills, which I didn't live anywhere near, but Finneytown was real far from Delhi, so I was doing a 45-minute drive anyway. Yeah, I probably would have gone to Walnut Hills, which is a public school, because the national merit, semifinalists and their SAT scores, they were better than St. X. They were really, it still is, I'm sure, a fine public school. Yeah. And so I'm just saying, when fully fleshed out, if you have that portability to go to any public school or private school, that's where I think the really good public school systems will rise, and the bad ones that are mismanaged will fall away. And maybe Walnut Hills School District ends up being 3 or 4 times the size that it is now because it's a center of excellence. I'm just saying.
No. I mean, and there's a lot to chew on. But
let's bring on Dave. So the other person here we have from the Buckeye Institute is attorney and litigator Dave Tryon. Dave, if you will, you're very active in Second Amendment issues as well as other issues. We talked a little bit on the phone about this Murphy versus Missouri terrible First Amendment case. But why don't you please tell us about this preemption litigation where the case is Doe because the person does not want to be persecuted by the city of Columbus by naming him or herself. So it's Doe versus the city of Columbus. If you don't mind, Dave, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I'll just mention up front, I'm having a little bit of internet problems, so my voice and my video might not sync perfectly. But so the Doe versus City of Columbus involves 6 plaintiffs, all of whom object to the City of Columbus's ordinance that bans 30-round magazines and mandates certain storage provisions. Now, one of the questions that often comes up when we're talking about these magazines, and a magazine is the part of usually a detachable magazine that attaches to a firearm, which can hold, depending on its size, anywhere from 7 all the way up to 30 or even more rounds of ammunition. And so the Columbus ordinance bans any magazines that hold more than 30 rounds. And our clients are, for one example, is a woman who is a recent immigrant, legal immigrant into the United States. She is now a citizen. She's a minority, and she was in the city of Columbus. She was assaulted. She called the police. The police came. They ignored her, would not even take a police report. At that point, she realized that she was going to have to take responsibility for defending herself. And so she went out and bought an AR-15, which is not an assault rifle, contrary to what a lot of people want to say. And so I asked her why an AR-15. She says because they are reliable, they're easy to use, they're lightweight, and for women, it's an ideal firearm. And they come with a 30-round magazine, and there's reasons to have that many rounds. So that's one of our plaintiffs, and others are similarly situated where they feel the need for this type of firearm to protect themselves. So we went ahead and she retained us, and we represented her the Buckeye Institute represented her on a pro bono basis, meaning she doesn't have to pay us anything, along with the others, the other 5 John Does. And so we sued, and we've sued based on the Article 1, Section 4 of the Ohio Constitution, which is the Ohio Constitution's right to keep and bear arms. We also sued based on the state preemption law, which says that the state is the only place where we can regulate firearms, and it prevents cities from regulating firearms because we want to keep the laws on this issue the same throughout the state, be consistent. So, wherever you go, you've got the same law. And because the state wanted to protect the right to keep and bear arms, which many of the cities don't value that right, that important value. So to kind of think about this, as you were discussing educational choice, and that's been a decades-long effort to get to the point where we are. The same thing happens in law and in Second Amendment or right to keep and bear arms jurisprudence. The case that has come forward today didn't just come up. This has been a decades-long effort. And in fact, I was involved in it in the 1990s when the city of Cleveland banned assault weapons. So at that time, I was in private practice, and we pursued that case. We sued the city of Cleveland, arguing that it violated Article 1, Section 4 of the Ohio Constitution, because at that time, you may recall, back in the 90s, the federal courts, not the Supreme Court, but the federal courts were all asserting that the Second Amendment protected a collective right, which is an oxymoron. There's really no such thing as a collective right. There's only individual rights. But the courts were insisting it was a collective, not an individual right. So we sued under the Article 1, Section 4 of the Ohio Constitution. We got up to the Ohio Supreme Court, which provides some very good language for us going forward. The court determined that the Ohio Constitution, first of all, guaranteed an individual, not a collective right. And it was a right for individual defense and security. Article 1, Section 4 says people have the right to keep and bear arms for their defense and security. So it's a little different than the Second Amendment. So the other thing that the court said was that the right to keep and bear arms in Ohio can be more protective of that right than the Second Amendment, but no less protective of that right than the Second Amendment, which is a very important statement that it's called Arnold versus City of Cleveland, very important. However, the court then said, well, the City of Cleveland has a reasonable basis for banning what they called assault weapons, which are not assault weapons. In any event, they're just semi-automatic firearms. Anyways, so while we won some important points, the actual outcome was unfortunate. And it's also silly that they would take a fundamental right and say, oh, as long as the state has a reasonable reason for violating that. Imagine if they said that about the First Amendment. Well, it's reasonable. Well, you're talking about certain things. We're going to ban your speech. Well, so that was a bad part of the decision. So then that was in the 1990s. So then after that, along came the Heller case in the Supreme Court, which directly addressed the Second Amendment and said the Second Amendment does provide an individual right. Then in 2010 was the McDonald case. And in the McDonald case, the court said, not only does it protect an individual right, but it protects individuals. It applies to the states as well. So not only the federal government can't ban firearms because there's an individual right, but states are also bound by the Second Amendment. Then finally in 2022, we had the Bruin case. And in the Bruin case, the court determined that the right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment has to be any laws that tend to infringe on that right have to be judged on the history and tradition of the Second Amendment, which means that you look at what the founders, when they enacted the Second Amendment, what did they understand it to mean? And that's a very important part of the analysis with respect to the Second Amendment, and it became very relevant when we sued the city of Columbus. So when we sued the city of Columbus, we said that, okay, even though in the Arnold case, the court actually said that you could ban certain firearms, we said here now we have Bruin as a guideline, and we now know that under Arnold, that the state constitution has to provide at least as much protection as the Second Amendment does under the interpretation now of Bruin, that you cannot ban what they call large capacity magazines that hold more than 30 rounds or more of ammunition. So the court agreed that was the case, and the court first determined that firearms magazines are in fact protected under the Second Amendment. And so then from there said, that the Article 1, Section 4 of the Ohio Constitution would not allow the city of Columbus to ban these 30-round magazines. Second, we argued that Section 9.68 of the Ohio Code, which preempts local laws, which are inconsistent with the state firearms regulations, are not legal. The court agreed with that as well. The city of Columbus, by contrast, said, no, wait, that law, 9.68, was amended twice. Now, let me back up. Section 9.68, this preemption law, has been challenged several times in the courts. Well, more than several times. But it's actually gone up to the Ohio Supreme Court twice. And on two occasions, the Ohio Supreme Court has said, yes, 9.68 is constitutional. It does not violate the Home Rule Amendment, which is what the cities have argued. So we said, look, Supreme Court has already said twice, this is legal, this is constitutional. And the city says, well, it's been amended twice. Well, the amendments were first to expand its scope so that it includes also regulation of knives. It also includes, was amended to say, this is the purpose of this, to protect the right to keep and bear arms. And so the court said, no, that doesn't change anything. It is still constitutional. Now, interestingly, down in Cincinnati, there were 2 lawsuits challenging 9.68. And one about 3 weeks ago said 9.68, this is in the Court of Appeals down in Cincinnati, 9.68 is constitutional. And then just yesterday or the day before, the second opinion came out and said 9.68 is constitutional. It still applies.
Wow.
So we are on now. Our case is in front of the Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court, on technical grounds, but not on these the fundamental issues, which ultimately will have to go back for final decision in the trial court. But right now, there's a preliminary injunction against the city of Columbus from enforcing this magazine ban.
Yeah. So, Dave, I will just mention to you that so I used to live in the city of Columbus, and way back when the city of Columbus enacted the, quote, as you say, assault weapons ban, which it is not. The definition of an assault weapon is medium caliber firearm with selective fire using a large capacity magazine. That's the definition of what an assault weapon is. And of course, you have to pay, you have to get an NFA tax. It has to be signed off by the chief of police or other law enforcement, and you have a background investigation to own a Class 3 firearm, which is what any assault weapon would be, as a Class 3 firearm. So you're 100%. Your definitions. I just want to reinforce when you say when the press and some of the politicians talking about assault weapons, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just semi-automatic rifles that have been around, since kids were using 22s to go out in the woods and target practice. I mean, it's just common as dirt kind of gun, and a ban on that kind of thing in the city of Columbus, when it passed, drove me out of the city. So I took my income tax, my household, my wife. We moved to a suburban area, and I remember several gun shows that used to be in Columbus, where the hotels would be filled, with firearms collectors and enthusiasts. The economic impact of doing these things is often not thought of, and it drives people lifestyle-wise and with their money, with their pocketbook, out of these cities that do that. So it's not only unconstitutional, it's dumb. It's just dumb. It's not good policy from a financial point of view for that city. So I want to throw that in the mix.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I think even more importantly is the reason people get firearms for a couple of reasons. One, for hunting. 2, for just sport. But 3, and most importantly, for self-defense. That's what many people feel the need to have a firearm for self-defense.
Right.
They used to call the firearm the great equalizer.
Right.
And as far as semi-automatic firearms have been around since the early 1900s. In fact, the semi-automatic pistol called the 1911 model has been around since 1911.
Sure.
And it's still used today.
Sure.
And it's still very popular.
Yeah, it requires an individual trigger pull for each discharge of the round. That's correct. A semi-automatic. You have to pull your finger has to move for each time that the round is discharged. So it's not a machine gun. It's not an assault weapon as defined by every military and every government that understands what that definition actually means.
And I would also note 30-round magazines have been around since World War II, at least. So they're nothing new. It's not like somebody came up with the idea of a 30-round magazine in the past few years. They've been around for at least 60 years, 70 years.
Right. I will also point out that in World War I, the Lee Enfield soldiers of the British Army were able to discharge their bolt action guns that had a magazine well built into the gun. They were able to cycle their bolt action at almost the same cyclic rate as a machine gun. So some of this idea about spray and pray and all that, you can do amazing things with a bolt action rifle. And, and certainly revolvers had been around even prior to the 1911. And you can think of a revolver as a semi-automatic because that cylinder with each pull of the trigger discharges 1 round every time. So you could have a 10-round, you could have a 30-round revolver, with the same basic martial effect of a 1911 or an AR-15.
Right.
May I ask, when do you expect the Supreme Court to decide on this appeals issue with Doe versus Columbus and then remand it back for further trial? When do you expect the decision on that?
Great question. So right now it's in the process of being briefed before the Ohio Supreme Court. That should be completed in the next month or so. And then the court will probably have oral arguments in a few months thereafter. And then it's another few months before they'll make a decision. And then it'll go back to the court. So probably sometime towards the end of this year, it'll one way or the other go back to the courts below. And so assuming it goes right back to the trial court and the court then hears right now it's just preliminary injunction, we would be seeking a permanent injunction. So that will take another 6 months at least. And then the track back up to the Supreme Court again, that's another year. So we're not going to have a final answer on this perhaps for a year and a half, 2 years.
And the makeup of the Ohio Supreme Court can change, right? Do we have some?
They're elected.
They're elected, and it's in this election cycle.
There's 3 up.
3 up. So okay.
Obviously, it's critical to get the right justices on the Supreme Court. We don't endorse the Buckeye Institute does not endorse anyone, but that's something important for who's seated there is important for all of these issues that we've discussed: educational choice and firearms rights.
Dave, if we should have started this out with this question, but could you just talk a little bit about the Buckeye Institute? When I first encountered the Buckeye Institute, I think they were out of Springfield or Dayton, Ohio, and it was good old Sam.
Sam Staley.
Sam Staley. I loved working with Sam, and he was helping us with privatization of municipal mass transit systems and various other things that Sam was involved in. And he was kind of working out of his trunk, and it was a small organization. I looked at your website. You have, meaning the Institute, has a formidable staff. And I'm wondering about how is the Buckeye Institute as a nonprofit? How are you guys funded? How do people participate with you? I get your newsletters electronically, and that's free. But, you must have people that ideologically want to contribute to the Institute and support your mission. How is that done? And a little bit about that. And then some of your amicus briefs, if you don't mind, when after you explain that.
Sure. Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So the Buckeye Institute is a very robust organization. We've become very helpful to the legislature, and as far as all of the work we do on the policy issues, we write a lot of papers. Greg helps inform the legislators of what we do, but a lot of internal expertise on policy issues and economic issues. And on the litigation side, we're very active, very prolific in supporting various causes. We file our own original litigation. We also support a lot of other cases through amicus briefs, look at the Supreme Court and other courts throughout the country. And so we've also filed actions in other parts of the country as well, original actions, that is. And if people just go to our website, they'll see all the great things we're doing, both on the policy side and the litigation side. And there's a big donate button on there for people who want to support us. And that's where we get our our help. There's people who donate who say, boy, I think these guys are doing great work and I want to help. I want to keep that work going. So please go to our website and you'll see some of the great things we're doing.
BuckeyeInstitute.org. BuckeyeInstitute.org. Just to reiterate the website there.
And you're now headquartered in Columbus.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Could you go into some of these amicus briefs? It tells you how long ago I went to law school. Never practiced. So if you don't mind,
Cincinnati's coming out.
Yeah, Cincinnati.
Is it a Cincinnati thing? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
It is.
I don't know. Maybe
we say roof instead of roof, and a lot of problems down there. But if you don't mind going into some of the amicus briefs. I think you mentioned the Chevron case we've discussed here about where regulators went off of. They actually started authoring law that Congress never authorized, and that was the Supreme Court reining that back in. And curious about some of these cases that the Institute's involved in. Sure.
So it's amicus. I think either one's fine. But we have, over the past year and a half or so, filed, I think it's over 70 amicus briefs throughout the country, many of them in the United States Supreme Court. We were one of the most prolific amicus writers and submitters in the country, I believe. And a lot of fascinating issues. We've done it's either 7 or 9 on Second Amendment issues. And I'll just mention 2 of those that I think are fascinating real quick. One is, although it's not directly impacting on the Second Amendment, it's an administrative law issue, which is the bump stock case. We have filed more than one amicus brief on the bump stock case, which just recently the court came out in the Cargill case and said, by golly, even though the administration says that bump stocks make your gun a fully automatic machine gun, no, they don't. That's not what the law says. And ATF is wrong in interpreting it that way, which leads right into the Chevron doctrine, because in the Cargill case, the courts below were looking at the Chevron doctrine. Chevron doctrine, so the Chevron deference doctrine says that when the agency interprets a statute, the courts will give the agency deference in that interpretation unless it's not reasonable. If it's arbitrary and capricious, we won't abide by it. But otherwise, we're going to defer to that interpretation. Well, that's wrong. That should not be because that's what the judge's job is, to analyze the statute and then determine what it means. Well, the response is, yeah, but they're experts in their field. Well, judges are always looking in cases at various experts. They don't decide the expert can present his view, and then the other side has an expert that presents its view. The judge gets to decide which one to believe, or the jury. The jury will get to decide which expert to believe. We see that every day in court. Well, they came up with this Chevron doctrine 40 years ago because it was easier, for one reason, to just say, we're just going to let them decide, and we think they've got some special expertise. That's wrong. So that was part of what was involved in the Cargill case. But directly on point are 2 cases that will come out later today, probably at 10 a.m., called Loper Bright and Relentless. And we filed amicus briefs in both of those cases. And in those cases, the court is looking at, the Loper Bright case is about fishermen off the East Coast, where they are monitored. They're herring fishermen, and the government monitors that their fishing to make sure they don't overfish, that they fish correctly. And to do that, Congress passed a law that says you've got to let people, government officers, on your boat to watch what you're doing. You said Congress. You didn't mean Congress. The administrative agency put that rule in there, not Congress, correct? No.
Okay, go ahead.
Incorrect.
Okay.
We'll get there. We'll get to the agency in a second. So okay. Congress said you got to keep people on your boat.
Wow.
To monitor this.
Wow.
So that's pretty intrusive to begin with.
Yes.
But then the agency that handles fishing, they ran out of money. They couldn't pay their people. So they said, we're going to interpret this statute to say that not the captain of the boat, not only do you have to let them on your boat and feed them and house them, you have to pay their salaries.
Oh, that's
what the agency did.
Yeah.
And that was
Wow.
based, and they're asking for the court to grant them deference because they're so smart, they can interpret the statute to say, yeah, we can force the captain to pay their salaries.
Wow.
Well, these are not rich captains. And so, it's killing them.
Sure.
And so that's what the Loper Bright case and the Relentless case is all about.
Wow.
We argue that before the court that this is wrong, this is not incorrect, and that our argument is that the agency has no better ability to interpret the law than the court.
Wow.
And we argued that the agency has experts. We think they're experts, but we don't get to see what they do behind the scenes in this black box, which is, I believe, was Justice Sotomayor called the agency experts a black box, not my words. And we said, so on the other side, let's let the regulated parties bring forth their experts on what the law means, and the judge can make the decision. But really, the judge is the one who's the expert and is constitutionally required to interpret the law, not the agency.
Yeah.
So that's going to be decided today. Most people expect that the Chevron doctrine is going to be either tossed off completely or drastically dialed back.
So Dave, this might be unfair to you, but you're the only lawyer here today. And what I don't understand about this First Amendment case, and I'm getting asked this a lot by people, as you probably are too. So the Supreme Court basically said under this Bertha case, which was heard the same day they heard the NRA versus Volo case, they heard the arguments on Murtha the same day. And in the NRA case, they said government action had taken place in New York by the Department of Insurance to squelch the NRA. And I think it was a 9-0 decision. And I believe Sotomayor wrote the majority opinion. Then hearing the case the same day on Murtha, which involved the White House under Biden sending FBI people to go out and talk to Facebook and Google and have this pressure on them regarding, I think, COVID and other topics that they wanted to diminish. They wanted to suppress that speech. Hearing the case on the same day, they said that those people didn't have standing, the two states and the 3 or 4 private individuals. How can anybody in the United States who has the right to both hear and to speak unfettered, how can they not have standing? I don't understand how they rebuffed those plaintiffs on the issue of standing. How can you not have standing as regards the First Amendment? And Justice Alito's defense would agree that they did have standing, but the majority says they didn't. Can you explain that at all?
Well, that is unfair because it's a complicated decision, and I'm puzzled as well.
Okay,
but I'll do my best.
Okay.
So in the NRA case, the NRA said, "Look, we have actual damages, monetary damages," and so the court said, "Yeah, you certainly have standing to assert your monetary damages, and so yeah, you can sue the government." Now, in the other case, they were asking for an injunction saying, look, the government shouldn't be allowed to go and jawbone these, and that we filed a brief in that case as well. We filed a number of what we call jawboning cases. And so the court, the argument is, look, the government can't influence Facebook and Twitter and all these other organizations to try and shut down our free speech. They can do it on their own, but the government obviously is involved in trying to squelch our free speech. So, as I understand the majority, they're saying, well, you weren't able to articulate a specific. You did not ask for any damages. First of all, you didn't say, well, we lost $1 million because you squelched our speech. They said instead, please tell the government, not please, but tell the government to stop doing this. And the majority opinion said, well, you don't have any indication that they're going to keep trying to do this.
Oh,
so you don't have standing. You need to be able to show that they're going to keep on trying to do this.
Oh, boy.
Well, I think we all know that they're going to keep on trying to do it. But in any event,
yeah, they were. Wasn't the jawboning, as you say? There was an implicit understanding that if you didn't please the White House, maybe your Section 230 protections might go away, might be somehow dissipated for big tech.
Yeah, well, it was even beyond jawboning. Jawboning is sort of like, I forget who the quote was from, but a king said, who will rid me of these difficult people? And without saying, hey, go get these people. So the knights went out and got those people because they wanted to please the king. Yeah. But here, it's even beyond that. It's more than just, oh, these people are terrible. These I sure wish somebody would stop them from saying these things. There was a lot of evidence, heavy duty evidence, saying that they directly called up Facebook and others and said, shut these people down, and if you don't, you're not doing it fast enough. You're not being aggressive enough. Yeah, I think in Discovery it came out, and the only reason I remember this cat's name is because it's a crazy name, Elvis Chan. There was an FBI agent named Elvis Chan that was sent, I think, for a while on a weekly basis to Silicon Valley to visit with the head of Twitter at that time, since sold to Elon Musk, but also Facebook, and they would have these powwows in person with the FBI about speech that they wanted suppressed. I mean, if that's not government action, so I'm befuddled by the decision. But yeah, I don't think it's explainable. And Alito certainly thought they did have standing, but I don't think the story has been fully written yet, because I think they can go back and amend the complaint or add other plaintiffs and come up and continue to move forward. I think they can find a way to get standing. Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
So you're thinking maybe the decision from the Supreme Court was a wink, wink. We need more, maybe.
Well, anytime you talk about standing, it always is. It's not a wink, wink. We're telling you what you've done now doesn't give you standing. That doesn't say you're not going to get standing. And the court didn't say what they did was okay. Even the majority didn't say what the government did was okay. They're just saying you're not the right person to bring this case, or the case that you brought doesn't show sufficient injury to give you standing. Okay. It's just like, I can't assert your rights on your behalf. You have to do it.
So maybe in this case, in their view, the majority's view in this decision, the injured party, or the party that was being pressured, would be the Silicon Valley entity. So maybe Elon Musk, X, needs to be added as a plaintiff, because they were actually being directed by the FBI to take, and other people at the White House to take down to deplatform people. And so maybe one of those private companies needs to be added as a plaintiff. I'm just saying.
Well, that's a possibility. The doctrine of standing is a challenging one. You may recall in the education forgiveness case, the loan forgiveness case that went up to the Supreme Court. There were a number of lawsuits filed for that. We filed one as well called Lada versus the United States, but the court ultimately found one of the plaintiffs had standing.
Wow.
And therefore went forward and said the educational loan forgiveness program was invalid. So now Biden has gone back and done a new education forgiveness program, which is now being challenged again. We filed an amicus brief in that case. And in that case, in two cases, the courts have barred or issued an injunction against the new loan forgiveness program. And that's going up on appeal.
Thank you, Dave. Well, we promised you guys it would be an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, and I think we've hit that. Time to wind up.
I think so.
And we'd love to have the Buckeye Institute in here on a regular basis, maybe once every month or two, with different experts and different topics, because
Great.
we're Common Sense Ohio, and I think Buckeye Institute is common sense driven as well. So I think we fit together, and thank you so much for coming in from Cleveland. Go Guardians! They're having an incredible, incredible season up there. So enjoy that, Dave. Get out to a ball game.
Yeah,
I'm still an Indians fan.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. And I heard there's a few.
Me personally.
Well, I heard there's a few Native American organizations, in fact, that want the Indians to be called the Indians again. So
I know where you're coming from. I'm a Miami graduate. I'm still I'm a Redskin.
Yeah,
I'm a Redskin.
Right,
right.
I'm a Redskin. I was of that genre. So yeah, exactly. Anyway, but yeah, thanks to both of you because
Greg.
I appreciated both of you putting some history to where things come up, because we can't fill in those holes.
No,
we're not good enough. We're not experts in that. Let's put it that way. And I think that means a lot to understand where it's come from, where it can go. Agree or not agree, it doesn't matter. It's like, but you have to know where it's come from to understand why it's happening. So that's good. No, but yeah, thanks to both of you. Again, remember, thanks to our sponsor, Harper Plus CPA. If you need anything, even if you're just doing individual taxes, they can cover you too. You didn't like your tax preparer this year. You didn't like the guys, as Steve would say, swinging the sign on the corner. Harper Plus CPA can handle you as well too. So if you didn't like what was going on with that, they can handle at that level as well. And that's all we got right now for Common Sense Ohio.